I was broke and needed a place to stay. She said the rent was negotiable. Then she looked at my mouth and smiled. That's when I knew this wasn't just about a room. Let's uncover what really happened. The eviction notice felt like a physical blow, the stark black print on cheap paper, a death knell for the fragile sense of stability I'd managed to cobble together in this overpriced, undersized city shoebox. My freelance graphic design work, once a steady trickle, had dwindled to a drought, and my savings account was echoing with the mournful sound of its own emptiness. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I spent the next few days in a frantic, caffeine fueled haze, scouring online listings, a desperate litany of no pets, credit check required, and first, last, and security deposit equivalent to a small nation's GDP. Just when I was about to resign myself to a future of couch surfing and existential dread, I stumbled upon it. A small, handwritten index card pinned to the chaotic bulletin board of a local coffee shop, its faded ink almost lost amidst the yoga flyers and band posters. Room for rent, it read in an elegant, slightly archaic script. Quiet tenant preferred. Inquire within. No address, no phone number, just an arrow pointing towards the counter. The barista, a perpetually unimpressed young woman with a constellation of facial piercings, merely shrugged when I asked, gesturing vaguely towards a shadowy back hallway I'd never noticed before. Old lady in 3B. Takes tenants sometimes. Weird hours. Even weirder rules. Cash only. Good luck. Weird hours, weirder rules. It sounded ominous, but the cash only part was a siren song to my depleted bank account. And quiet tenant preferred. That was me. I was practically a ghost. My social life as anemic as my finances. I found 3B at the end of the dim, narrow hallway, its paint peeling, the air thick with the scent of dust and something else, something faintly floral and unexpectedly sweet, like dried lavender and old paper. I knocked, my knuckles rapping against the dark, heavy wood with a trepidation that felt disproportionate to the act. The door creaked open, not wide, just a few inches, revealing a sliver of a dimly lit interior and an eye. Just one eye, a startling luminous shade of violet framed by a web of fine wrinkles, an eye that seemed to see right through me, assessing, weighing, judging. Yes? A voice emerged, low and surprisingly resonant, like the vibrations of a cello string. It was a voice that held echoes of a bygone era, of drawing rooms and hushed secrets. I saw your notice, I stammered, suddenly feeling like an ill-prepared petitioner before a queen. About the room? The eye blinked, slowly, deliberately. You are quiet? As a mouse, I assured her, perhaps a little too eagerly. The door opened a fraction wider. And you are solvent? The question hung in the air, blunt and unapologetic. I swallowed the truth, a bitter pill. Temporarily challenged, I admitted. But I'm resourceful. I always find a way. Another long, assessing pause. Then, come in. The apartment was a cavern of shadows and antique furniture, draped in heavy velvet curtains that seemed to swallow the meager light. The air was thick, with that same scent of dried lavender and old paper, now mingled with the faintest hint of something else, something warm and spicy, like cloves or cinnamon. It was the kind of place where time seemed to have stopped, or at least slowed to a languid, anachronistic crawl. She emerged from the shadows, and I finally saw her in her entirety. She was small, bird-like, her frame delicate beneath a flowing silk robe the color of bruised plums. Her hair, a startling shock of silver, was piled atop her head in an intricate, old fashioned knot, secured with pins that glinted like tiny stars in the dim light. Her face was a fascinating roadmap of wrinkles, each one a testament to a life lived, to secrets kept, but it was her eyes that held me captive, those luminous, violet orbs, now revealed in their full, unsettling glory. They were ancient eyes filled with a knowing, almost predatory intelligence. She gestured towards a worn armchair, its velvet nap rubbed smooth with age. Sit. I sat, perching on the edge of the seat, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. She remained standing, a small, formidable figure silhouetted against the dim light of a heavily shaded lamp. The room is small, she said, her voice a low murmur, but clean. The rent is negotiable, depending on certain arrangements. Arrangements. The word, spoken in her resonant cello string voice, seemed to vibrate in the still, heavy air, laden with an unspoken, unsettling significance. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy thrum against my ribs. What kind of arrangements? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled then, a slow, enigmatic curve of her thin lips, a smile that didn't quite reach her ancient, knowing eyes. We can discuss the particulars, she said, her gaze unwavering. Should you prove to be suitable? Suitable. The word hung there, a challenge, an invitation, a threat. I felt a shiver trace its way down my spine, a frisson of fear mingled with a strange, unwelcome, and utterly compelling curiosity. I needed this room, desperately. But as I looked into those luminous violet eyes, I had the sudden chilling premonition that the price of sanctuary in this shadowy, anachronistic haven might be far higher and far more unconventional than I could possibly imagine. The silence that followed her pronouncement about arrangements and suitability stretched, taut, and fragile, like a spider's web glistening with morning dew and the promise of a trapped fly. I sat there, perched on the edge of that antique velvet armchair, feeling like the latter. Her violet eyes, ancient and unnervingly perceptive, never left my face, and I had the distinct, discomfiting sensation that she was not merely looking at me, but through me, assessing the very marrow of my being, weighing my desperation against some unseen, unspoken criteria. The room itself is at the back, she finally said, her voice a low, silken thread in the dim, lavender scented air. It overlooks the um, garden. She paused as if the word garden held some secret hidden meaning, such as it is, mostly herbs, I'm afraid, and shadows, but it is quiet, as you profess to be. I nodded, a quick, jerky movement, my throat suddenly dry. Quiet is good, I managed, the words sounding ridiculously inadequate in the face of her enigmatic pronouncements. I work from home, mostly graphic design, so quiet is essential. Ah, an artist, she murmured, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her thin lips. Or a craftsman, perhaps? There is a difference, you know. Her gaze flickered over me, a slow, deliberate appraisal that made my skin prickle. Do you consider yourself an artist, child? The question, so unexpected, so personal, caught me off guard. I fumbled for an answer, my mind scrambling to find the right words, the ones that would deem me suitable. I I tried to bring a certain aesthetic sensibility to my work, I stammered. But it's commercial art mostly, functional. Function can have its own beauty, she conceded, her head tilted slightly, like a curious bird assessing a new, potentially interesting specimen. But beauty without Soul is a hollow thing, don't you find? I swallowed, feeling increasingly like I was navigating a verbal minefield where every word, every nuance could trigger an unforeseen explosion. Yes, I agreed, my voice barely a whisper. Soul is important. Her smile widened just a fraction, but this time it seemed to reach her eyes, igniting a faint, unsettling glimmer in their violet depths. Indeed, it is, she said softly, and a commodity in increasingly short supply, wouldn't you agree? She glided then, her plum colored silk robe whispering against the threadbare Persian rug towards a small lacquered table in the corner of the room. Upon it sat a crystal decanter filled with a dark amber liquid and two small, exquisitely cut glasses. She poured the small measure into each glass, her movements precise, elegant, almost ritualistic. A sherry? She offered, her voice a low, silken invitation. To seal our potential arrangement? Or perhaps merely to fortify you against the chill of the afternoon? I hesitated. The sensible part of my brain, the part that was screaming at me to run, to escape this shadowy, anachronistic haven and its enigmatic, unsettling mistress, urged me to decline. But the desperate part, the part that was facing eviction, the part that was inexplicably, dangerously drawn to the strange, compelling aura of this woman, this place, found itself nodding. Yes, please, I said, my voice a little breathless. Thank you. She handed me a glass, her cool, dry fingers brushing against mine for a fleeting, electrifying moment. The contact sent a shiver through me, a jolt of awareness that was both unwelcome and undeniably, perversely thrilling. The sherry was old, an ancient, complex vintage that tasted of dried fruit and toasted nuts and something else, something I couldn't quite identify, something that seemed to echo the very essence of this room, um, of this woman, a hint of dust, of decay, of secrets kept for too long. We sipped in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the faint ticking of a grandfather clock from somewhere deep within the apartment, and the ragged, uneven rhythm of my own breathing. The rent, as I mentioned, is negotiable, she said finally, her violet eyes fixed on mine over the rim of her glass. I am less concerned with monetary recompense than with other, shall we say, more personal considerations. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Personal considerations. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implication. What? What kind of personal considerations? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, my throat suddenly tight. She took another slow, deliberate sip of her sherry, her gaze never leaving mine. I am a woman of particular tastes, child, she said, her voice a low, husky purr, and of certain needs, needs that have, for too long, gone unattended. A cold dread, mingled with a strange, unwelcome, and utterly compelling curiosity, began to uncoil in the pit of my stomach. I knew, with a terrifying, exhilarating certainty, that I was standing on the edge of a precipice, the wind howling around me, the abyss yawning below. I require companionship, she continued, her voice dropping even lower, almost to a whisper, a silken, seductive sound that seemed to wrap around me, drawing me closer, closer. Conversation, an attentive ear, a willing spirit, willing spirit. The words echoed in my mind a dangerous, intoxicating incantation. And sometimes, she added, her crimson lips curving into that slow, enigmatic smile, her violet eyes glowing with an inner fire. Sometimes I require more. The word, so simple, so innocuous, yet in this context, in this room, spoken by this woman, it was laden with a universe of forbidden possibility. I should have run. I should have made my excuses, thanked her for the sherry, and fled that shadowy, lavender scented apartment as if the hounds of hell were at my heels. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was mesmerized, transfixed, caught in the intoxicating spell of her presence, of her words, of the unspoken promises that hung heavy in the air between us. And as I looked into those ancient, knowing, predatory violet eyes, I knew with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me that my life, my carefully ordered, predictable life, was about to be irrevocably, beautifully, terrifyingly changed. The word more, spoken in Serafina's low, resonant contralto, hung in the air of that shadowy, lavender scented room like a tangible thing, a silken web spun with threads of forbidden desire and an unsettling, irresistible allure. My mind, already reeling from the sherry and the sheer, overwhelming strangeness of the situation, struggled to process the implications, the unspoken promises, the potential perils. More? I echoed, my voice a faint, breathless whisper, betraying the turmoil that raged within me. She smiled, that slow, enigmatic curve of her thin lips, a smile that held no warmth, no reassurance, only a kind of ancient, predatory amusement. Her violet eyes, those luminous, unsettling orbs, seemed to glow with an inner fire, as if she could see right through my carefully constructed facade of composure into the very core of my being, where fear and a strange, unwelcome, and utterly compelling curiosity were engaged in a desperate, silent battle. Yes, child, she purred, her voice a silken caress that nonetheless sent a shiver of apprehension down my spine. More life in its richer, more piquant manifestations often requires more than mere conversation, more than just an attentive ear. It demands participation, a certain reciprocity. Reciprocity. The word, so clinical, so detached, yet in this context, it felt laden with an almost unbearable weight of unspoken meaning. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird beating its wings against the bars of its cage. I could feel a flush creeping up my neck, a betraying tide of heat that I prayed she couldn't see in the dim, heavily curtained light of the room. I took a hasty sip of my sherry, the aged, complex liquid doing little to soothe the sudden dryness in my throat, the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I needed this room, desperately. The eviction notice was a stark, unyielding reality, a ticking clock counting down to homelessness, to an uncertainty I couldn't bear to contemplate. But at what cost? What more was she hinting at? What unspoken arrangements lay hidden beneath the surface of this bizarre, anachronistic negotiation? I am a I am a woman of appetites, Lena, she continued, her voice dropping even lower, almost to a whisper, a seductive, dangerous sound that seemed to bypass my rational mind and speak directly to some older, more primal part of my being. She used my name and the intimacy of it, spoken in that low, husky timbre, sent a fresh wave of shivers through me. Appetites that have for too long been neglected, starved even. She paused, her gaze unwavering, her violet eyes holding mine captive. And I find, my dear, that when one is famished, one develops a certain creativity in seeking sustenance. The word so anodyne, so everyday, yet in her mouth, it sounded like a euphemism for something far darker, far more elemental. I felt a tremor run through me, a frisson of fear mingled with a strange, perverse, and undeniably compelling excitement. I was playing with fire, I knew, dancing on the edge of an abyss. But there was a part of me, a reckless, desperate part, that was drawn to the flame, to the darkness, to the intoxicating allure of the forbidden. I am not entirely sure what you mean, madam. I managed, my voice a little shaky, a little breathless. It was a weak, transparent attempt at deflection, and we both knew it. Her smile widened, just a fraction, and this time it did reach her eyes, igniting a faint, unsettling glimmer in their violet depths, a glimmer that looked an awful lot like anticipation. Oh, I think you do, child, she murmured, her voice a silken caress. I think, deep down, in that quiet, observant, artistic little soul of yours, you understand perfectly. She leaned forward, just slightly, her movement fluid, almost serpentine, the plum colored silk of her robe whispering softly in the still, heavy air. Her scent, that intoxicating blend of dried lavender and old paper and something warm and spicy, seemed to intensify, enveloping me like a silken shroud, making my head swim, my senses reel. Let us not mince words, Lena, she said, her voice now a low, conspiratorial purr. The world outside these walls is harsh, unforgiving, especially for a young woman like yourself, an artist, a dreamer, adrift in a sea of practicality. Her gaze flickered over me, a slow, deliberate appraisal that made my skin prickle, my cheeks burn. You need sanctuary. You need security. And I need release. Release. The word, spoken with such quiet, deliberate intensity, hung in the air between us, an explosive charge, a forbidden promise, my breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure she could hear it. I am offering you a symbiosis, Lena, she continued, her voice a seductive, irresistible poison. A mutually beneficial arrangement. You provide me with companionship, with an attentive ear, with a willing spirit, and with that certain more we spoke of. And I, in return, will provide you with a home, with security, with the freedom to pursue your art without the crass, mundane worries of rent. She paused, letting her words sink in, her violet eyes, never leaving mine, their gaze a potent, mesmerizing force. It is a simple transaction, my dear. Um, Barter, if you will, your services for my sanctuary services. The word, so cold, so clinical, so transactional, was like a slap in the face, a brutal, unwelcome intrusion of reality into the shadowy, anachronistic dream world she had so skillfully woven around me. And yet, and yet, there was a part of me, a dark, reckless, desperate part that was undeniably, perversely thrilled by the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her proposal. It was outrageous, it was scandalous, it was intoxicating. I thought of the eviction notice, of the dwindling numbers in my bank account, of the gnawing, relentless anxiety that had become my constant companion. And then I thought of this room, this shadowy lavender scented haven, this anachronistic sanctuary from the harsh, unforgiving world outside. And I thought of her, this enigmatic, captivating, terrifying woman with her ancient violet eyes and her crimson lips and her voice like a cello string, a woman who seemed to offer not just a room, but an escape, an adventure, a journey into the forbidden, intoxicating depths of the unknown. My mouth, she said then, her voice dropping to a husky whisper, her crimson lips curving into that slow, predatory smile, her eyes glowing with a triumphant, knowing fire. You have a very expressive mouth, Lena. I have noticed. And I find myself wondering what other expressions it might be capable of. The air in the room seemed to crackle, to vibrate with a almost unbearable tension. Her words, so direct, so unambiguous, so shockingly, beautifully, terrifyingly explicit, hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs, sending a jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity through my entire being. My mouth, she wanted my mouth as payment for sanctuary, for security, for her. The world tilted, dissolved, reformed. The carefully constructed walls I had built around myself, around my desires, around my very identity crumbled into dust. And in their place, there was only this moment, this room, this woman, and the terrifying, exhilarating, irresistible abyss of her offer. The silence that engulfed the room after her audacious pronouncement was a living, breathing entity, thick with unspoken desires, with the intoxicating allure of the forbidden, and with the dawning, terrifying realization of what she was truly proposing, my mouth, as payment. The words echoed in the chambers of my mind, each syllable a tiny, explosive charge, detonating a cascade of conflicting emotions, shock, certainly, but also a strange, unwelcome, and undeniably compelling thrill, a frisson of illicit excitement that coursed through my veins like a potent, dangerous drug. I stared at her, my own lips parted slightly, my breath caught in my throat, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, desperate for escape, yet perversely, thrillingly, captivated by its captor. Her violet eyes, those ancient, knowing, predatory orbs, held mine captive, their gaze unwavering, intense, as if she were trying to read my very soul, to gauge the precise moment when my fear would yield to my desire, when my carefully constructed morality would crumble beneath the weight of my desperation, my curiosity, my need. The dim, lavender scented air of the room seemed to grow heavier, more oppressive, charged with an almost unbearable tension. I could feel a fine sheen of perspiration on my palms, a betraying tremor in my hands as I clutched the delicate stem of the sherry glass. The aged, complex liquid, which had at first seemed so warming, so comforting, now tasted like ash in my mouth. You find my proposition unsettling, perhaps? She murmured, her voice a low, silken caress, her crimson lips curving into that slow, enigmatic smile, a smile that held no warmth, no reassurance, only a kind of ancient, predatory amusement, or perhaps intriguing? Intriguing. Yes, that was the word. Terrifyingly, exhilaratingly, damnably intriguing. I was a moth drawn to a flame that was both beautiful and exquisitely, deliciously dangerous. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone and thrilled me to the core that I was about to be consumed. It is unconventional. I managed my voice a hoarse, barely audible whisper, the words feeling ridiculously inadequate in the face of the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her offer. Ah, unconventionality, she purred, her voice, a low, seductive hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around us. The spice of life, my dear Lena, the antidote to the dreary, predictable monotony of existence. She leaned forward, just slightly, her movement fluid, almost serpentine, the plum colored silk of her robe whispering softly in the still, heavy air. Her scent, that intoxicating blend of dried lavender and old paper and something warm and spicy, seemed to intensify, enveloping me like a silken shroud, making my head swim, my senses reel. Think of it, Lena, she continued, her voice dropping even lower, almost to a whisper, a silken, irresistible poison, a sanctuary, a haven, a place where you can create without the crass, mundane worries of the world intruding upon your muse. Her gaze flickered over me, a slow, deliberate appraisal that made my skin prickle, my cheeks burn. And in return, a small service, a gesture of appreciation, a sharing of oneself, sharing of oneself. The euphemism was almost laughable in its delicate, anachronistic absurdity, yet it was also undeniably, perversely seductive. It stripped away the crass, transactional nature of her proposal, cloaking it in a veil of intimacy, of shared vulnerability, of art. My needs are simple, Lena, she went on, her voice a low, conspiratorial purr, but specific. I crave sensation, the taste of life, the warmth of connection, things that have, for too long, been denied me, denied her. By whom? By what? By the passage of time, by the isolating grandeur of this shadowy, anachronistic prison, or by something else entirely, something darker, more sinister, something I couldn't even begin to comprehend? The questions swirled in my mind, a chaotic, unanswerable jumble. But beneath them all, a single, terrifying, exhilarating thought was beginning to take root, a thought that was both a surrender and a rebellion, a capitulation and a liberation. I needed this room. I needed this sanctuary. And a part of me, a dark, reckless, desperate part, a part I hadn't even known existed until this moment, this woman had called it forth from the shadows. A part of me wanted this, wanted her, wanted the forbidden, intoxicating taste of this arrangement. Your mouth, Lena, she repeated, her voice a husky whisper, her crimson lips curving into that slow, predatory smile, her eyes glowing with a triumphant, knowing fire. It is a gateway, is it not? To pleasure, to sensation, to oblivion, oblivion. The word so final, so absolute, yet in her mouth it sounded like a promise, an invitation, a benediction. I looked into those ancient, knowing, predatory, violet eyes, and I saw a reflection of my own burgeoning desire, my own reckless curiosity, my own desperate, undeniable need. And in that moment, the last vestiges of my carefully constructed morality, of my sensible, predictable self, crumbled into dust. The eviction notice, the dwindling bank account, the gnawing anxiety, it all faded into insignificance, replaced by a single, overwhelming, all consuming thought: I would do it. I would pay her price. I would offer her my mouth, my body, my soul, um, for sanctuary, for security, for her. I took a deep, shaky breath, the lavender scented air filling my lungs, heavy with the intoxicating perfume of the forbidden. Yes, I whispered, the word, a fragile breath, a surrender, a vow. Yes. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her crimson lips, a smile that reached her ancient, knowing eyes, igniting a blaze of predatory, possessive fire in their violet depths. Excellent, she purred, her voice a low, silken caress, a sound of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. I knew you were suitable. And as she rose from her chair, her plum colored silk robe whispering around her like the wings of some ancient predatory bird, and glided towards me, her hand outstretched, her violet eyes burning into mine, daring me to take it, daring me to cross the threshold into her shadowy, intoxicating world. I knew, with a certainty, that both thrilled and terrified me, that my life, my carefully ordered, predictable life, had just been irrevocably, beautifully, terrifyingly changed. The taste of the sherry, ancient and complex, still lingered on my tongue, a foreshadowing, perhaps, of the intricate, potentially bittersweet complexities of the bargain I had just struck. Serafina's hand, when I finally reached out and took it, was surprisingly cool, her skin dry and papery, like ancient parchment, yet her grip was astonishingly firm, almost possessive, as if she were afraid I might bolt, might reconsider the precipice upon which we both now stood. She didn't speak, just led me from that shadowy lavender scented drawing room through a labyrinth of dimly lit hallways, the air growing colder, more still, with each step we took. The only sounds were the soft whisper of her silk robe against the threadbare runners and the frantic, erratic thumping of my own heart, a wild, trapped bird beating its wings against the cage of my ribs. My mind was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Fear, certainly, a cold, clenching dread that settled in the pit of my stomach, but also a strange, perverse, and undeniably compelling excitement, a frisson of illicit anticipation that coursed through my veins like a potent, dangerous drug. I was acutely aware of her beside me, of her small, bird like frame, of the subtle, intoxicating scent of dried lavender and old paper, and that underlying hint of something warm and spicy, a fragrance that seemed to be an intrinsic part of her, of this house, of this strange, anachronistic world I had just willingly, recklessly stepped into. We finally stopped before a heavy oak door, its dark wood scarred and pitted with age, a door I hadn't noticed before, tucked away in a shadowy alcove at the far end of a long, deserted corridor. She produced a small, ornate silver key from the depths of her robe, its intricate design glinting faintly in the dim light, and inserted it into the ancient lock. The mechanism turned with a well oiled, almost silent click, a sound that seemed to echo the final, irrevocable click of a door slamming shut on my old life, on my old self. She pushed the door open, revealing not a room, but a narrow, winding staircase, spiraling downwards into an Stygian darkness, the air that wafted up from below, cool and damp, carrying with it the faint, unsettling scent of earth and something else, something vaguely metallic and disturbingly sweet, like overripe fruit on the edge of decay. My heart hammered against my ribs. A primal, instinctive fear, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. This was wrong. This was dangerous. I should turn back. I should run. But her hand, still firmly clasped in mine, tightened its grip, a silent, unyielding command. And her violet eyes, when they met mine in the shadowy gloom, held a mixture of amusement and a predatory, possessive gleam that brooked no argument, no dissent. Come, Lena, she whispered, her voice a low, silken caress, a seductive, irresistible poison. The arrangements await. And she led me downwards, into the darkness, into the unknown, into the heart of her shadowy, intoxicating world. The staircase was steep, a narrow, stone hewn spiral that seemed to descend into the very bowels of the earth. The air grew colder, damper. With each step we took, the silence broken only by the soft whisper of our footsteps and the ragged, uneven rhythm of my own breathing. I could feel a fine sheen of perspiration on my palms, a betraying tremor in my hands, which were still firmly clasped and twined with hers. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged into a circular chamber, its walls lined with rough hewn stone, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, of ancient, decaying wood, and that same faint, unsettlingly sweet metallic tang. The only light came from a scattering of thick beeswax candles, their flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls, transforming the chamber into a scene from some half forgotten Gothic romance, a place of secrets, of shadows, of forbidden desires. In the center of the chamber, draped in heavy dark velvet, was a chaise lounge, its lines elegant, decadent, anachronistic, and beside it a small, intricately carved wooden table, upon which rested a single silver goblet, its surface tarnished with age, and a small leather bound book, its pages yellowed, its script faded and unreadable. Serafina released my hand, her touch lingering for a moment, sending a fresh wave of shivers through me. She glided towards the chaise lounge, her plum colored silk robe whispering around her like the wings of some ancient predatory bird, and sank onto it with a sigh that seemed to emanate from the very depths of her being, a sigh of weariness, of anticipation, of hunger. She gestured towards the goblet, her violet eyes, luminous in the flickering candlelight, fixed on mine. A libation, Lena, she murmured, her voice a low, husky purr. To seal our pact, to anoint our communion. Communion. The word, so sacred, so spiritual, yet in her mouth, in this chamber, it sounded like a euphemism for something far darker, far more carnal. My throat was dry, my heart pounding, but I moved towards the table, my legs feeling like lead, my mind a maelstrom of fear and a strange, perverse, and undeniably compelling excitement. I picked up the goblet, its silver cool and heavy in my trembling hand. The liquid within was dark, almost black, its surface reflecting the flickering candlelight like a pool of obsidian. It smelled faintly of wine, of honey, and of something else, something I couldn't quite identify, something that made my senses reel, my head swim. Drink, child, she commanded, her voice a silken whisper, yet it held an undeniable, irresistible authority. I hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then I raised the goblet to my lips and drank. The liquid was thick, syrupy, surprisingly sweet, yet with an underlying bitterness, a metallic tang that coated my tongue, that sent a strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through my veins. A warmth that was both comforting and deeply unsettling. I drained the goblet, the last drops a fiery caress against my throat, and set it back on the table, my hand shaking. Serafina watched me, her crimson lips curved into that slow, enigmatic smile, her violet eyes glowing with an inner fire. Good, she purred, her voice a low, seductive hum. And now, Lena, now for the more? And she patted the velvet cushion beside her, a silent, unyielding invitation to join her, to surrender, to become her midnight snack. The flickering candlelight cast Seraphina's face in a play of light and shadow, accentuating the sharp angles of her cheekbones, the enigmatic curve of her crimson lips, the ancient, knowing fire that burned in her violet eyes. The velvet of the chaise lounge beside her looked impossibly dark, like a pool of night, beckoning me towards an unknown, intoxicating oblivion. My legs, which had felt like lead just moments before, now moved with a strange, dreamlike fluidity. as if guided by some unseen, irresistible force. I approached the chaise, my heart hammering against my ribs, a wild, frantic drumbeat in the otherwise unnerving silence of the subterranean chamber. The air was thick with a scent of beeswax, damp earth, and that faint, unsettlingly sweet metallic tang, now mingled with the more intimate, more personal aroma of Seraphina herself, dried lavender, old paper, and that underlying hint of something warm and spicy, a fragrance that was both a comfort and a potent, dangerous aphrodisiac. I knelt beside the chaise, my silk nightgown, the one I had worn in anticipation of a very different kind of nocturnal encounter, pooling around me on the cold stone floor. The fabric felt suddenly too thin, too fragile, an inadequate barrier against the intensity of her gaze, the palpable weight of her unspoken desires. She reached out, her cool, dry fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw, her touch sending a shiver through me, a jolt of awareness that was both unwelcome and undeniably, perversely thrilling. Her thumb stroked my cheekbone, a feather like caress that made my breath catch, my entire being focused on that single electrifying point of contact. You are frightened, Lena? She murmured, her voice a low, silken caress, her violet eyes searching mine, as if seeking not just an answer, but an acknowledgement, a surrender. A little, I admitted, my voice a hoarse, barely audible whisper. The admission, so raw, so honest, seemed to please her. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Fear, she purred, her voice a low, seductive hum, can be a powerful spice, my dear. It heightens the senses. It sharpens the appetite. Appetite, the word, spoken with such quiet, deliberate intensity, hung in the air between us, an explosive charge, a forbidden promise. Her gaze dropped just for a fraction of a second to my mouth and then flickered back up to her eyes, her violet orbs, now dark and dilated, glowing with an inner fire that was both terrifying and exhilarating. And I, Lena, she continued, her voice dropping even lower, almost to a whisper, a silken, irresistible poison, am famished. She leaned forward, her movement fluid, almost serpentine, the plum-colored silk of her robe parting slightly, revealing a tantalizing glimpse of the pale, almost translucent skin of her throat, the delicate tracery of blue veins beneath. Her scent enveloped me, a heady, intoxicating cloud, making my head swim, my senses reel. Her lips, those crimson predatory lips, were inches from mine. I could feel her warm breath on my skin, a soft, insistent caress. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure she could hear it. I closed my eyes, a silent, complete surrender. The world tilted, dissolved, reformed. There was only this moment, this chamber, this woman, and the terrifying, exhilarating, irresistible abyss of her desire. Her lips found mine. And it was not a kiss of tenderness, not a kiss of affection. It was a kiss of possession, of hunger, of an ancient, insatiable need. Her mouth was firm, demanding, her tongue a silken, knowing invader that mapped the sensitive contours of my own mouth, tasting, exploring, claiming. A low groan rumbled in her chest, a sound that was both an admission of pleasure and a cry of primal elemental hunger. I melted into her, my own lips parting, my body, with a will of its own, yielding to her silent, irresistible command. Her hands, those cool, dry, surprisingly strong hands, moved from my face, sliding down my neck, her fingers tracing the line of my collarbone, sending shivers of illicit pleasure coursing through me. They found the delicate pearl buttons of my silk nightgown, and with a deft, unhurried, yet undeniably purposeful movement, she began to undo them, one by one, revealing the soft, pale skin beneath. Her gaze, when I dared to open my eyes, was fixed on the slow, deliberate unveiling, her violet eyes glowing with a predatory, possessive fire that made my breath catch, my entire body tremble. The last button gave way, and the silk parted, falling open, exposing my breasts to the cool, damp air of the chamber, to the searing heat of her gaze. I felt a flush creep up my neck, a betraying tide of heat, but there was no shame in it, only a strange, perverse, and undeniably compelling excitement. She leaned back, just slightly, her eyes raking over me, a slow, deliberate appraisal that made my skin prickle, my nipples harden into tight, aching buds. Exquisite, she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion that was both reverent and ravenous. And then she lowered her head, her crimson lips finding the sensitive skin just below my ear, her tongue tracing a searing path downwards, towards the valley between my breasts. I gasped, my head falling back, my fingers clenching in the heavy velvet of the chaise lounge, my body alive with a desperate, urgent need. This was it, the culmination, the surrender, the payment. And as her mouth closed over my breast, her tongue, her teeth, beginning a new, even more intimate exploration, I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that I was no longer just Lena, the struggling graphic designer, the quiet tenant. I was hers, her companion, her confidant, her midnight snack. And the taste of my own surrender, mingled with the ancient intoxicating flavor of her desire, was the most terrifying, most beautiful, most exquisitely, damnably addictive thing I had ever known.